Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman. We're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. As you probably noticed, I've been doing fewer videos recently. I'm working on my 13th chess book, which is an expansion of about 160 of my chess tips of the day into a book for Everyman Publishing. So I'm doing that with a lot of my spare chess time. But I thought for today's game, we'd do something we haven't done for a while, which is look at one of the great games. I thought I'd pick a Kasparov-Karpov game. We haven't had too many games from either of those players in my series. This is a game I watched live, I hate to say it, about 32 and a half years ago. And it was a very exciting game. Basically, we're going to see Kasparov, even though both sides are castle king side, we're going to see Kasparov practically sacrifice his entire queen side. So let's get looking at the game. Kasparov was white. He played e4. You can see over here on the left, it's game 12, I think, of the 1990 match. Kasparov against Karpov. Now that you can see who's playing over here on the left, I'm going to move the board over slightly so we can see more of the game and the database on the right. All right, let's see. That should be right about centered okay. All right, so Kasparov opens up e4. Karpov, as he likes to do, likes to play either e5 or usually Caro-Kann. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Now this is a match was played about 10 years before Kramnik played a lot of the Berlin defense of knight f6 against Kasparov with a lot of success when he won the world championship 10 years later. At this point in time, the Berlin was considered a little bit questionable, so I don't think Karpov played it in any of the matches with Kasparov. By the way, the Karpov-Kasparov matches will definitely go down as the best series of matches between any two players. They played, I believe, 6 matches, 5 or 6 matches, I think 6, and they were all close, and they were all between two of the greatest players that ever lived who were both near their prime. Karpov was a few years younger. Karpov is actually almost my age. Karpov and I are contemporaries, and Kasparov is about, on the order of, like 9 years younger than Karpov. I guess Kasparov just had his 60th birthday, and that means maybe there's even a 10-year difference. But it wasn't like one of them, it wasn't like Lasker Capablanca or Steinitz Lasker, where one of them is 23 and the other one is 49 or anything like that. Ever since FIDE took over, the differences have been smaller because they forced the world champion to defend his title every 2 or 3 years. Okay, so a6, the old Morphy move, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, rook e1, b5. This is all Tabia, mainline, closed Roy Lopez, bishop b3. And now, these days, most people castle here for black. In the earlier part of my career, castle was considered to signal the marshal attack, and then people would play anti-marshals if they didn't want to do a marshal. In other words, after castle, if white played c3, black could play d5 and play the marshal attack, which is considered relatively drawish these days. So when people would castle, people would play either c3 and allow the marshal or play an anti-marshal. But in these days, if people castle and white plays c3, they could just as well play d6 and play the closed variation, the main line of the closed. In those days, it was considered a signal to play d6 here to say, I'm not going to play the marshal, don't play an anti-marshal against me. So d6 was the most common move. If we look at the database, d6 is played 59% of the master games. We can see the database here on the bottom. Castles is played 41% of the time. All right, so d6. And now, since black is not signaling the marshal attack, there's no reason for white not to play c3. If white doesn't play c3 here, as I mentioned in my earlier video on the closed Roy Lopez, I think it was the second video I ever did on my YouTube channel. If you don't play c3 here, then black can play knight a5 and win the bishop pair. So c3 is played 96% of the time. Black castles, white plays h3. And in that video that I did a couple years ago, I talked about this position as being kind of the Tabia position for the closed Roy Lopez. All right, and now black has a bunch of moves that he can play. Knight b8 is the Breyer defense. Knight a5 is the classical defense. Black plays the more exciting Zaitsev defense, bishop to b7, to immediately put pressure on. Let's turn on the engine here so you can see not only the database underneath, but you can also see the analysis of the top 3 moves. All right, they're going to play book for many, many moves here, but we're getting out of the main tabia into the main lines of the Zaitsev variation. So white plays d4. That's the move he's been setting up. White's been trying to set up the position where he can play d4 and recapture that pawn with a pawn and maintain his center. Black plays rook e8. What he's getting ready to do is play bishop f8, and then his rook on e8, his knight on f6, and his bishop on b7 will all be pointing at that pawn on e4, and black will have discovered attacks with e takes d4. So white anticipates that and plays knight bd2 to overprotect the e-pawn. Black plays bishop f8, again getting ready to play e takes d4 in some lines depending on what white does. White has several moves he could play here. As you can see in the database, a4, the move played in this game, was the most popular, but it's only 36%. a3 is 31%. They both won 26% and drew 63% of their games, so they have identical results. And you can see from the engine at the top, a4 is 0.5, a3 is 0.4. d5 was also played 20% of the time. Usually you don't close the center, but of course if it's a book move, then you can. There's lots of lines in the Ruy Lopez where you close the center after c5, but closing the center before black plays c5 is considered a little bit less active because black can then hit at the center with c6. All right, so white plays a4. One of the advantages of playing the Ruy Lopez over playing the Italian game is that if black wants to get the bishop off of those diagonals, he plays a6 and b5. And if you're a beginner, you might say, well, that's good for black. He gains space on the queen side. But actually what happens is he weakens a little bit of those squares, and it gives white a move like this break move, a4, so that white can get some pressure on those light squares on the queen side. All right, here the engine says knight a5 is the best move, but knight a5 is only played 9% of the time. And it did do a little bit better than the main move here that was the main move in these days that Karpov played, which is h6. And now white wants to, again, overprotect. White wants to bring his knight from d2 to f1 to g3 so he could guard the pawn, but he can't do that right away because if he moves the knight on d2, then black can play e takes d4 and discover an attack on the e-pawn, and white will lose a pawn because after knight f1, e takes d4, no matter how white takes back on d4, he can't take with the queen because the knight's guarding it on c6. So he has to take with the pawn or the knight, and then black has 2 pieces on e4 and white only has 1. So that explains Kasparov's move, bishop c2. These moves were all played very quickly because they had been played before at the time of this game. In fact, they had been played a couple games before in the match, and it wasn't for a couple more moves that they actually diverged from the previous game. All right, so Karpov plays e takes d4, Kasparov takes back, and Karpov hits the bishop on c2, also hitting that pawn on e4 a third time. Kasparov, of course, will not give up the bishop pair. He still has these really nice Lopez bishops here, hitting at the king side. We'll see that come into play later. Black plays c5, attacking at the center. White plays d5, blocking the bishop from attacking the e-pawn, which might give him time now to play knight to f1 and knight to g3. Karpov plays knight d7. If you look down here, this position has been reached 1,185 times in the database. So this is all well-known theory. And now rook a3 was played 95% of the time. Now, it's very interesting. Look at the depth here. We've got Stockfish 14 plus saying rook a3 is equally the best move with knight f1, and they're the 2 moves that were played the most in the database. And yet, after rook a3, the engine that did a quick and dirty analysis of the game said that's an inaccuracy and white should play knight f1. Well, we pretty much know that's probably not true, that it's not an inaccuracy. All right, so black can now play c4. He can play f5. Those are the moves that were played 92% of the time. And as you can see from the database, c4 did a lot better than f5. f5 allowed white to win 35% and only lose 14. c4 allowed white to win 18% and lose only 8. Again, these were some of the original games played with this line. You know, you can see, if you look down here in the database, this game was played in, the one we're looking at here was 1990. All these other games in the database are after that. So they're still trying to figure out at that point what's the right ideas. And you also have to remember, in 1990, Kasparov was definitely using computers to prepare for the matches. But the computers, this is pre-Deep Blue times, and the computers were viewed as just like a aid that they could use to help find tactics and make sure there weren't, you know, something wrong with the line, as opposed to something that's actually better than the humans. So the engines in 1990, when this game was played, weren't as big a deal as they would be today, where the players today would look at the engine and say, oh, I can do this and this and this. And, you know, in those days, it was more like the engines would give them ideas, or the engines would find tactical mistakes, but the engines weren't looked on as, you know, the be-all and end-all of, you know, how good some of these lines were. All right, so let's keep going. Kasparov plays the move f5. Kasparov plays rook a e3. As you could see, this was all played in other games. This is 1990. Game 12. We're getting near the end of what was played up to this time. Most of the games in the database here are now after this time. So here, knight f6 is the most common move, but the engine says knight f6 is not one of the top 3 moves. The engine says that black should play f takes e4. So here today, I'm sure f takes e4 has been played. Ooh, wasn't played at all. That's interesting. Not at all in the database that I see out of the 25 games. All right, so knight f6 for Karpov. Here the engine suggests Kasparov should play rook on 3 to e2 with a nice advantage. He plays knight to h2. The idea of knight h2 is when the pawn on f5 is exchanged, he's going to play knight g4 and open up the king side and try to eliminate some of black's pieces. Kasparov's going to take advantage of the fact that that knight on b4 is not able to defend the king side, while all of his pieces can get to the king side, and he's going to have at least one more piece on the king side to attack. So black plays king h8. White plays his best move, b3. Black trades the pawn. White takes back. And now, again, the engine suggests that Kasparov should play f takes e4, where he's only down by about 7/10 of a pawn. He plays c4, and now white's lead is all the way up to 1.2. If he plays his best move, bishop b2, which he does. And now those bishops are both pointing toward the king. Black has more pawns on the queen side. White has more pawns to the right of the c-file. That will change, I think, in a move or two. Pawn takes. Kasparov takes back and sacrifices his d-pawn. Knight takes. So now black has 3 pawns to none on the queen side. Sorry, 3 pawns to 1 on the queen side. And he has connected passed pawns on the d and the c file. So the endgame here is going to be way better for black, because he's going to have connected pawns, and all white has is a 3-on-2 kingside majority. But white's got all the bishops pointing at the black king, and he's going to bring his knight in from h2 to g4. And he's going to have a good attack. And you can see the engine thinks that Kasparov's winning already with rook to g3, which is what he plays. Black defends with rook e6. He has nothing better. And now the engine says that Kasparov should bring the knight back to the center from the square he came from and go back to f3 with a big advantage. You can see if he doesn't play knight f3, the engine says his advantage drops way down. He plays knight g4, and now his advantage dropped from about 1.6 to 0.6. And now the engine is suggesting that Karpov should sacrifice back a pawn by playing knight d3. The idea on knight d3 is, even though it's attacked multiple times and only guarded once, the best white can do by taking it off is to win a pawn. That would give back the pawn, but it would give black the bishop pair and would also stop those bishops from pointing at the king. So knight d3 is the best move. Unfortunately for Karpov, he doesn't find it. He plays queen to e8. And now the engine says if Kasparov can find the sacrifice, knight takes h6, which is, it's not a sneaky pin because if the pawn on g6 can't capture the knight on h6, but the rook on e6 can. So Kasparov does take it. Best move. And now the engine suggests that Karpov's best defense is to play rook takes h6. We could look at what would happen if rook takes h6. If rook takes h6, then knight takes d6, queen h5, queen takes, rook takes, knight takes b7, getting back the piece, king g8. We can't go through every line and explain it. It's only a 25-30 minute video, but we're just looking at the best moves for both sides here. Rook h6, bishop e4, knight f4, bishop c3, rook e6, rook g4, and it says white's up by almost about 3 pawns. All right, so let's go back to the game. After knight h6, Karpov didn't want to go into that. He calculated some of these lines and determined that it was too dangerous. So he played c3, trying to block the bishop. And white plays knight to f5. Engine says best move. And now Karpov can take the bishop, which he does. Now Karpov is up a piece, but that king is looking very lonely over there, and those knights are very strong. Queen g4, only good move. Only move that gives Kasparov a winning position. Of course, this involves a lot of calculation. And now the engine suggests black should play rook. The analysis, the engine in the analysis is what I'm trying to say, as opposed to the engine that's running right now, says rook g6 is the best move. But Stockfish 14 running here says that rook g6 isn't even in the top 3. So in any case, we're seeing plus 4.9. So it's really unfair for the annotating engine to give Karpov a double question mark for a move when he's already losing. I mean, he goes from minus 4.9 to minus 8, but it takes a lot of calculation on both sides' part, and he's losing on all the lines anyway, so he's trying to give himself the best chance. Notice black is still up a piece, but white has a tremendous amount of pressure on the king side. Kasparov checks, queen h4 check. Engine says black should play king g8, but again, we're looking at 9.2 versus 11. So they're both losing terribly, so it's not really fair to give question marks in these kind of positions. But rook to h6, of course, Kasparov's going to capture that with a knight. Karpov takes back. And now white played an interesting move. We were watching the game and we're trying to figure out what's the best way for him to break in. And we never suspected that king h2 was the best move. But look at the engine. The engine says king h2 is the best move at 12.4. And this is why Kasparov is such a great world champion and such a great attacking player. I mean, king h2, it's like if you showed this position to a lot of people at my level, we wouldn't be looking at king h2 as a candidate move. We'd be saying, what does that do? We've got a bishop, a knight, 2 rooks, and a queen aimed at his king. How do we get our pieces up there and checkmate him? King h2, that looks like a complete waste of time. But actually, it's the best move by almost 4 pawns. So completely hats off to Kasparov for playing a move like that. King to h2. Black tries to centralize the queen with queen e5. Again, the annotating engine gives it as inaccuracy. And of course, queen e5 is not one of the 3 best moves, but the best moves all leave him down by more than 10 pawns. Why? You might say he's down by 10 pawns. Why isn't he resigning? Well, if you actually look at the pieces that are on the board, white has a rook and against a bishop and a knight. Both sides have 4 pawns. Both sides have a bishop and a knight, but black has an extra bishop and a knight. White has an extra rook. Well, if you use Reinfeld values, a bishop and a knight is worth 6 and a rook is worth 5. So Karpov isn't going to resign when he's ahead in material unless he sees a line where it's forcing that he's going to lose more material or mate. So he's going to keep playing, of course. All right, so Karpov plays queen to e5. Kasparov plays knight g5, sneaky pin. The pawn on h6 can't take him because it's pinned to the king. And of course, white has two threats. He's threatening rook takes e5, and he's also threatening knight f7 check. Now, Karpov can take the rook on e1, but if he does, then knight f7 is mate in one, I believe. Queen takes e1, knight f7 is check. The king can't go to h7 because of that bishop on b1. He can't go to the g file because of the rook. So that's going to be mate. So they complain about Karpov's net. Again, the annotating engine says queen f6, question mark, exclamation point, checkmate is now avoidable. He should play queen takes g3 check. But the Stockfish 14 that's looking at it says even if queen takes g3 check, then it's still mate in 11. So queen f6. Again, we got to compliment Kasparov for continuing to find the best moves. He plays rook e8, pinning the bishop, threatening all kinds of things. Actually pinning both bishops. He pins the c8 bishop to the rook. He pins the f8 bishop to the king. After bishop f5, they give that a dubious, and they say again checkmate is now unavoidable. Well, if it was unavoidable 2 moves ago, or a move ago, it's unavoidable now too. All right, so bishop to f5. Kasparov says, oh, look, I got all kinds of sneaky pins. He takes queen h6 check. Of course, you have to calculate all this before you play it. Now, bishop takes h6 is illegal. So he has to play queen h6, but that allows knight f7 check. And there's only one legal move now, which is king h7. And this gives Kasparov the chance to play the mating Zwischenzug, bishop takes f5 check. This is not a difficult calculation for a master once you get all these forcing moves, because there's only one move in reply. For instance, in this position, the only legal move is queen to g6, so it's fairly easy to if you could visualize the position, then you can calculate it. And pretty much everybody rated over, whatever, 2200 is going to be able to visualize this ahead and say, oh, then he has to do this, then I can do this. And it's all very forcing. So queen to g6. And now rook takes g6 is mate in 16, did it say? I changed it. Now it just says plus 71 pawns. But Kasparov just decides to go way ahead in material and play bishop takes g6 check, which only leaves him ahead by 12 pawns. So, when you see an easy win, you're not looking for a better one. If you see a good move, you want to look for a better one. You want to find the best move you can in a reasonable amount of time. But if you see a move that wins the game easily, then you're not going to waste your time looking for one that wins it even more easily. So, yes, Kasparov didn't play, quote, the best move, but he played a move that wins the game quite easily, so he's not going to look for other stuff. Karpov says, let me run my king out toward the middle where I won't get mated. Kasparov says, all right, but now I have a tremendous lead in material, and my bishop on g6 is guarding that pawn on b2 from becoming a queen on b1. That's the key. Black says, let me develop that bishop. White says, I'll put the rook on the same line with that b pawn and also hit his knights. Black tries to guard his knights. White says, well, I could take one knight and open up the line to the pawn. Black says, yes, but I get the piece. White says, all right, but I'll take that piece. And black resigns because if he takes knight takes d5, white can just play rook takes b2, and he's up 2 exchanges and 2 pawns with 3 connected passed pawns. And at that point, it's starting to get silly, not that it hasn't been over for a while. Okay, so this was, I believe, what did we say, the 12th match game of the 1990 match between Kasparov and Karpov. One of the great attacking games by Kasparov. You could see he had to really calculate things. I watched this game live, and it was like, oh my goodness, all those pieces are disappearing on the queen side. So we have a rare case where you castle on the same side, and yet Kasparov throws the kitchen sink. And when I say the kitchen sink, he didn't really attack with his pawns. You can see at the end of the game, even though he had a kingside attack, he still has a pawn on h3 and g2 and f2 at the end of the game. He really threw the kitchen sink with his pieces at the king on the same side of the board that he was castled on. A very, very, very exciting game to watch, and a very nice attacking game by Kasparov. And these lines in the Decisive gave a lot of exciting games in this time period. Of course, these days with the engines, the defenses are a little bit better, and black's usually playing things like the Berlin variation on move 3 rather than going into stuff like this, but it's still played occasionally. And again, exciting chess. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed our videos. Again, I'm not making them quite as frequently as I was before because of my book. When I'm done the book, we'll start to go back. But I do have a video on almost every aspect of chess improvement. So if you use my playlist or you do a search on my channel, Dan Heisman Chess, you can find what you want, quiescence errors. You can find basic tactics, basic thought process, how to study openings, how to go over Grandmaster games, how to look up your own games in databases and engines. Just all kinds of stuff is here on the channel. Please tell your friends about the channel. If you haven't liked the video, that's okay, but you can like it. You can subscribe. We have a bunch of subscribers. And just pass the word. Thanks very much. The next one probably won't be for a few weeks again, but once I get done the book, we'll probably try to make them more frequently. See you next time. Thanks. Bye.